Hello everyone, we're just waiting for a few more people to join. Give it a couple more seconds. Right, hello everyone and welcome to our Wednesday webinar. I'm Emily Crossley, co-founder of Duchenne UK and mum to Eli with Duchenne. I'm also joined by our co-founder Alex Crossley, who also founded Johnny Jack and is mum to Jack. So thank you all so much for taking the time to listen to this webinar this lunchtime. I know it's not easy to find the time with homeschooling and juggling that with work, lockdown and trying to keep sane. So we really appreciate you joining us. Today's webinar will be looking at nutrition, how we can use diet to keep us healthy and our boys healthy. And we're hosting it at a slightly earlier time than usual because our speaker today is joining us from Melbourne, Australia, where I think the time has just gone 9 p.m. at night. And we're very pleased to be joined by Zoe Davidson. Welcome, Zoe. Zoe has very kindly given up her time to talk to us today. She is a research dietitian at Monash University and Murdoch Children's Research Institute. So Zoe's prepared a selection of slides. Do feel free to ask questions as we go using the Q&A button in the Zoom toolbar, and we will try to answer as many of them as possible, but we'll let Zoe finish her presentation first and then we'll go to questions. Zoe, welcome. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to hand over to you for your presentation.
Excellent. Thank you very much for having me. I hope I am coming to people who are safe, well, and remotely sane in this crazy time. I was thinking to myself, I think one of the positives, if we can see them, is our kind of extra connection during this time. So I'm actually really thrilled to be coming from Australia to UK to talk to you about nutrition in Duchenne. My background is as a dietitian, but I've kind of really stepped more into a research role, and I've been looking at the role of nutrition in Duchenne and nutritional management over the last kind of 10 to 12 years. So I thought I'd just start off today by talking a little bit about why nutrition is important in Duchenne. Nutrition plays a role really across so many systems in the body. And what we're trying to do is essentially optimize nutrition so we can tick that off as something that's sorted or managed in terms of looking after Duchenne. You know, just to give you some examples, when we look at what the body is made up of, we know it's primarily made up of body and fat, and that's what we talk about as body composition. And nutrition plays such a key role in our body composition. Yes, no amount of protein will ever replace dystrophin, but what we can actually look to do is making sure we're getting enough protein to make sure our muscles have what they need to function. Nutrition plays a really big role in the gastro tract, so things like your stomach and your intestine. A massive area of research at the moment is looking at the microbiome, so all the bacteria in your gut and how that functions. Practically, nutrition in the gut is really key in terms of helping to manage constipation and other gastro complaints such as bloating or feeling full. As we all know, nutrition is a key factor in bones and helping keep them strong. I'm going to touch a little bit today on the role that nutrition plays in immunity, which is actually, obviously really important at the moment. Nutrition is important in terms of our lung function as well. So having our weight appropriate is important for healthy lung function. So if we're too underweight, that can impact lungs, and too overweight, that can also impact how our lungs function. In Duchenne specifically, we really see some extremes in terms of weight, and that often underpins a lot of the nutritional management issues. So we see boys gaining weight very early on in childhood, and then we also see boys kind of struggling to maintain their weight or losing weight kind of in adolescence and in men in adulthood. So there's a range of bodily systems that nutrition plays a role in. So we need to think about how we can optimize nutrition in Duchenne. I thought today I'd just really focus mostly on weight management, because I know that is one of the most challenging things during childhood. and it happens very early on. We can see, you know, some boys start to gain weight very rapidly from age 5, 6, 7. So these are some of the key considerations that you might think about in terms of managing weight in Duchenne. Yeah, I say this kind of with a grain of salt. You know, if we can prevent weight gain, that's often the best approach. And some of the things to think about in terms of prevention is actually just keeping an eye on weight and how it's tracking. And we do that on growth charts for children. So things like having a weight and a height done every 6 months in your clinic and having that plotted, either your neurologist, a GP or a dietitian can do that. And then you can start to see if there are any changes outside of those growth curves that might indicate that weight gain is starting to creep up a bit too quickly. If you're having more frequent clinic visits, then I would say even if you can jump on a scales, then that can be really helpful. There are a few other key time points then where we might kind of focus some nutritional counselling. One is obviously when a boy is starting on to steroids, because we know steroids can lead to quite intense hunger. So having some tips in your toolbox to manage hunger or hanger, as it often can be, that's a really key time to look at nutrition. And also sometimes as a boy is starting to use a wheelchair more often, so we might actually be expending less energy. And that's a time where we can, you know, readjust and do some counselling as well. If there's any other, you know, key points later on, might be, you know, upcoming, if there's going to be surgery, there can be some counselling around that as well. When we're looking at weight management, and this, you know, is often broadly across all children, our primary goal is always to stabilise weight. You know, when we're seeing a really upward steep trajectory of weight gain, the best thing that we can do is stop it. And especially in childhood, you know, children, if we can stabilise weight, they will sometimes grow into that weight, or we can just keep it steady, is a really, you know, our primary goal. In terms of weight loss, you know, I think this really needs to be considered carefully and on an individual basis. We know when we lose weight, we lose mostly fat, but we will lose some muscle as well. For some children, you know, the excess weight is actually impeding function and walking, and so perhaps some weight loss might be useful. But not always, and I think it needs to be really carefully monitored in children. So I really think, you know, the first thing is we just want to stop the weight gain and keep the weight steady is a huge success. In terms of how we actually manage weight, we talk a lot about what we call energy balance. So this is eating what our body needs in terms of food energy. And we measure food energy in calories. So when someone's talking about calories, you're essentially saying how much energy is this food providing to my body. And then we try and measure that, you know, match that with how much energy we're expending. And again, that can change for boys with Duchenne over the years. So we just need to kind of touch base and readjust that energy balance. So dietitians are really key, and they can help with that energy in and energy out type balancing. They know food really well, and they have tools that can help estimate how much energy children will need. The recent guidelines do actually recommend seeing a dietitian every 6 months, but I know this is challenging in terms of clinics actually having access to dietitians, but also specialised neuromuscular training in dietitians as well. So I think that's something that we can really focus on and build shared knowledge amongst dietitians. So I wanted to share, I guess, some food tips, or you know, hopefully something a bit practical in terms of helping to manage weight. I wish I could tell you a one-size-fits-all diet plan, but that's really not the case, unfortunately, really in any aspect of nutrition. So it is always going to be a bit of a balancing act. The first thing, and I'll say this always for families and when we're working with children, is, you know, how make changes that work for your household and your family. I think that is the most important thing. If you've ever had to, eat something, a restricted diet for a little while, whether it's, fasting for surgery, how hard that can be when a whole lot of other people are doing something different. So, find changes that work for your household or your family. There's also a lot of other learnings that go on around meal times in terms of role modeling, peer learning, learning social skills, manners. So, keeping the family food environment, I think, is really important. In terms of the foods, I'd encourage you really to sometimes shift your focus and focus on the foods that we should be eating instead of the foods that we shouldn't. So it is a slight mind shift, but sometimes I think it can help in terms of maintaining changes. So really what we want to be doing is encouraging and focusing on getting those 5 really key food groups. So when I talk about 5 main food groups, I mean grains and cereals, fruit, vegetables, dairy, and our meats or meats alternatives. And by shifting our focus and trying to eat mainly these foods, we can sometimes start to eat less of the foods that aren't so great. So things like, takeaway chips, lollies, etc., which do have an important part in our diet, but not as everyday foods. So again, I encourage you, shift your focus and focus on those 5 key food groups. And I was looking up just in terms of preparing for this presentation, and in the UK you have the Eat Well guide, and that looks like a lovely, I've been through the website, there's lots of recipes, portion size helping, and tips and tricks in terms of getting those 5 food groups in. Often asked about protein in Duchenne. We don't really have evidence in terms of having an increased protein intake, but what I would recommend is eating at least to the recommendations, and also encouraging thinking about how you can space your proteins over the day. So a lot of people will eat easily enough protein but tend to eat it all at dinner time. So if we can kind of shift the protein across the day, it means our body will have a constant supply of protein. The other benefit of that is that proteins help us feel fuller for longer. So they can actually be also a kind of a tool in your toolbox in terms of managing hunger. I'd also encourage you to think about proteins in terms of snacks as well. So there's lots of easy foods that we can encourage for snacks if they work for our child, if they like boiled eggs, if there's any type of canned fish, that's a really kind of good school lunch item, or if there's anything that you can add to those to make them, help your child eat them. Lean meat, chicken, just kind of think out the side of the box with your proteins. And of course, all our dairies, are great sources of protein for main meals and snacks. In terms of managing hunger, I would encourage kind of the use of free foods. And when I say free foods, these are foods that provide very little energy to our body, so often very low calorie foods. I think we're lucky today in terms of our food supply that there are a range of actually diet products that can help in terms of just being something else that we can rely on. So diet products, sometimes your diet drinks or jellies or dessert might just be an extra little something that can help in your weight management journey. Berries are actually a very low calorie food. So strawberries, blueberries, raspberries, blackberries, frozen or fresh. Frozen is often a lot more economical, and there's a lot you can do with them. So berries, I find definitely, especially I think you guys are coming into summer, are something that can really help. Also, non-starchy vegetables. I know not extremely exciting. I imagine there's probably some people going, not veggies all the time, and definitely not. I'm not saying that, but they can be again a really useful snack, or thinking about that half an hour window before dinner, using carrot or cucumber snacks then can be just really helpful to help in terms of managing hunger. And the final thing in terms of food tips I'd encourage you to think about is your drinks. So, you know, if there is one thing that, you know, I think we can usually easily cull out of diets, it is things like fizzy drinks, and some juices aren't great either. There's a couple of reasons why we think about this like that. Firstly, your drinks are often fizzy drinks are often very high in calories because of the amount of sugar in them. They provide absolutely no nutritional benefits, so no vitamins or minerals. But the thing that I think we need to be aware of as well is that we often have fizzy drinks with food. So essentially we can be doubling the amount of energy that we're eating in one meal just by having our drink. So, you know, that's something that we can easily replace with water, potentially some diet products in moderation, and really pull down the energy quite easily. You know, one example I always talk about, in Australia we have a company called Boost Juice, or I'm sure there's many similar in the UK, make lots of smoothies and juices. And a large kind of Boost smoothie would have as many calories as a Big Mac. And people might sit down and have that smoothie or juice with a sandwich. So essentially having a sandwich and a Big Mac, but not quite realizing that that's a second meal. So I think really think carefully about drinks. In saying that though, it is important to have enough fluids and drinks throughout the day. And that was a really strong kind of discussion. We had a group of nutrition people meet to talk about nutrition, Duchenne, a couple of years ago, and a big focus about encouraging fluid in terms of, there's a whole range of benefits, but some practically is really important in terms of things of like managing constipation. And again, spacing out the fluid through the day can help. Lots of tips and tricks to help you kind of get fluid intake in the day. You know, something that I use personally is getting a water bottle the size of, you know, the water that you need to have, or knowing that you need to get through about 2 water bottles of a day can be tools to help you get the right amount. These are the recommendations from the latest Duchenne care guidelines. Again, they're approximate values, but it gives you an idea about how much fluid we should be aiming for a day. Obviously, nutrition plays a really key role in our bone health. Again, like protein and muscles, calcium and vitamin D are not going to kind of fully counteract the impact of steroids on bones. But we can ensure that we are having enough calcium and vitamin D. And there is a bit of research that shows that eating enough calcium according to recommendations and taking vitamin D can help with our bone health. In terms of calcium foods, you know, dairy is a really key source, as many of you will know. Things like milk, yogurt, cheese, but there are also a range of non-dairy sources as well. Interestingly, tofu, firm tofu, has quite a bit of calcium in it if it's hardened with calcium salts. Also, if you can't tolerate dairy, going for fortified non-dairy milk, so soy, almonds are big rage in Australia at the moment. But the key, if you're using these non-dairy milks, is to make sure that they are fortified with calcium, because often they don't contain large amounts of calcium unless they're fortified. So look for that fortification. And then a whole other range of non-dairy sources for calcium. I guess, so the tricky thing is sometimes these need to be consumed in quite large quantities. So for almonds, for example, you'd need about 100 grams of almonds to have the same amount of calcium as a glass of milk. And when you're eating 100 grams of almonds, that's actually bumping up your calorie intake quite a lot. So it's that fine balance. Again, I was doing a little bit of looking around in terms of calcium resources in the UK, and the British Dietetics Association has a great tool that can help you work out how much calcium you should be having in a day based on a star system. Vitamin D is an interesting nutrient. We primarily get a lot of our vitamin D through sun exposure. The other thing is we know that boys with Duchenne have lower vitamin Ds, and we did a bit of a research in Australia a few years ago, and this was in Queensland. If you've ever been to Queensland, it's a very sunny, warm state, and we measured vitamin D in boys who were still going to school, still quite active boys, and their vitamin Ds were all quite low. So that is something that we need to manage, often need a regular blood test and supplementation managed through the medical team. And boys respond very differently to supplementation as well. So sometimes different doses need to be used. As I said earlier, I thought I'd just touch on very briefly nutrition and immunity amongst the COVID-19 world in 2020. I'm sure many of you have heard or seen ads about certain supplements to boost immunity. And unfortunately, nutrition can't super boost immunity, but there's a range of nutrients that play such a key role in our immune system. So we need to make sure that we're eating enough of those nutrients so that our immune system can function optimally. Some of those key nutrients are listed on the screen. I guess what we don't need to do is go out and eat huge amounts of these nutrients or take mega doses of them. However, again, we do need to make sure that we're eating a range of foods from those 5 food groups to be getting enough of those nutrients for our body to function optimally. The one I would particularly note again is vitamin D. So just based on what I was saying, making sure you're either taking a supplement or vitamin D levels are adequate because we can't get a lot of vitamin D from our food sources. The final thing I just thought I'd touch on a little bit, we're often asked about in kind of nutrition, is the role of nutritional supplements in Duchenne. And I'm sure you've read about a range of supplements or might have tried some as well. So there's been quite a few supplements that have been trialled in clinical trials in Duchenne and kind of even more so in lab-based research. To date, the strongest level of evidence, I would say, is around creatine monohydrate, but I would also follow that by saying there's been no clear recommendations for any one supplement or for everyone to routinely take supplements. And there's still quite a fair bit of ongoing research around a whole range of other supplements as well. I think if you're considering using supplements, I think there's just a few things to think about or encourage you to do in thinking about the use of supplements. The first, I would always say, kind of discuss with your medical team in terms of things like safety and dose, if there's going to be any potential interactions with any medications, for example. I would think a little bit about kind of expense in terms of supplements. Some can be very, very expensive, and seeing if that's kind of realistic, ongoing. Also, essentially related to expense is the quality of the supplements. I'm sorry, I'm not quite sure how the regulation of supplements in the UK. In Australia, it's reasonably well regulated, but I know kind of potentially in the US, sometimes there's quite poor regulation around actually what's in supplements and the quality of what's provided. So think carefully about where you're sourcing your supplements. And my biggest recommendation in terms of talking about starting a supplement is to think about an objective outcome to have measured before you start. So you're working with your physiotherapist to, whether it's a North Star, or if you could do a 6-minute walk test, or another type of outcome that might be related to the effect of that supplement, so that you can try it for 3 months and then come back and do the outcome again. And then you've got something a bit more objective to say, has this worked for us? And the other thing I'd probably say, I just want to, I'm talking about supplements outside of calcium and vitamin D, sorry, to clarify. So, just some things to think about if this is something that you do want to try. And hopefully you can have some good open discussions with medical teams about that as well. So I've just put up a few resources that may be helpful. Last year, the World Duchenne Day actually profiled nutrition in Duchenne, which was fantastic. And from that, there's a group of people who got together and wrote a resource about nutrition in Duchenne across different years. So we've got in childhood, in teenage years, and then into adulthood. And there's also some other nutrition resources as well. This website also has a document in terms of looking at safety profiles in different supplements as well. And then I've just actually put the websites for some UK specific resources in terms of the Eat Well guide and the calcium resource as well. The UK Eat Well guide, you may have may not been there, but there is, I was just looking, there's a range of recipes, and I think the portion control or portion sizes, sorry, information can be quite helpful as well. All right, I think that's essentially my slides and a lot of me talking. I wonder if there's any questions. I saw a few popping up.
There have been some questions, Zoe, and before we go to them, I just wanted to thank you so much for a very user-friendly, clear and not overwhelming presentation. I think all the suggestions you made there were very clear and very manageable for people to think about. But yes, we have had some questions. And I think the first one comes from John Devlin, which is something that I think a lot of us do talk about. And we are constantly reading things about how nutrition can help many different aspects of our lives, physical and mental. And John talks about why elite sports spend huge amounts on nutritionists and advice, and how much there is on the internet about muscle recovery and health, which a lot of nutritionists don't tend to talk about in DMD. They mainly focus on a balanced diet. So his question is, what about things like green tea, beetroot, chia seeds, berries, food like spinach, which is an antioxidant, foods that are anti-inflammatory, that regulate oxidative damage and fat reduction in the muscle. Are any of these foods things that we should be making an effort to incorporate into our diet to go over and above providing a balanced diet? Is there anything we can do to actively eat that will help look at some of the effects of Duchenne on the muscle?
I think there's a really good point. There's a lot we can learn from sports nutrition and translate across to Duchenne, and some are, especially in terms around protein dosing, and also I think a lot of the supplement literature, especially things like creatine, has actually translated across to the sports world. But I think there's a lot more kind of work there that we could do in terms of collaboration. I guess in terms of upping foods in the diet, it's a tricky one. There's often things that I wouldn't say we need to eat excess in terms of any foods at the moment. We don't have any evidence to suggest that. I think the key is actually eating the right balance. So getting enough fruit and vegetables every day, getting enough dairy, getting enough grains, that in itself is very challenging. So I think actually focusing on getting the right amount of the 5 food groups is what we should really start to look at before kind of looking at increasing larger amounts. There is some research ongoing in terms of green tea extract, and that would be really interesting to see how we're going that way for now. But I don't think there's kind of any good evidence around mega doses of things for now.
Okay, thanks for answering that. I'm going to go to Alex, who's got a few questions. Alex, do you want to put them to Zoe?
Yeah, hi Zoe, that was a really good, interesting presentation, thank you. So the first question I've got is from Eli. Do you have any recommendations on protein powder drinks and green drinks?
So, protein powdered drinks or whey supplements or casein-based supplements, they can be a useful tool in the diet. I don't think everyone has to go and have them. They're just another way we can get protein. They can be really convenient in terms of making up a shake for breakfast, for example, having it as a morning tea snack. So I think they can be convenient and useful, but they're not necessary. I would also just caution, if you are being careful in terms of weight management, just being aware of the calories again that you can take in a shake. It's very easy to up it if there's banana, milk, protein powder, for example. But there's other ways. Another trick that we've always used is adding just plain old milk powder to milk is a way to kind of have very enriched milk without the price tag.
Okay. Go on, sorry.
And then in terms of, green drinks, I imagine that's something like a green smoothie or, kale, spinach. I think that's what you mean. Again, useful snacks, great way to get in our vegetables, but you want to make sure that you're actually kind of NutriBulleting up the greens in it, so you're getting all the other benefits such as the fibre. If you're juicing it, we lose so much of the fibre in foods. So I think, yes, you can use them, but make sure you're getting the fibre as well.
Great. And then just a quick question on milk. What is best, skimmed, semi or full fat milk? What would you say to you? I would,
if I had to give one answer, I would say semi. Across all of them, you'll have the same amount of calcium. And in terms of the difference in calories from your semi-skimmed down to your skimmed is not huge, but kind of up to your full cream or full fat milk, that can start to make a little bit of a difference. So for flavour profile as well, that's why I kind of tend to go in the middle. If you do like skim, that's great as well. You'll still get the right amount of calcium and it can drop your calories a little bit more.
And I think you've already kind of answered this question, but we've got one saying, should we give protein at night? My understanding from your presentation was to try and give it at regular intervals throughout the day.
Yeah. I would just, if you can evenly space it, breakfast, snacks, lunch, afternoon tea, dinner, that's the most ideal.
Okay, and there's one final one here. If you want to give your son a treat, what's better, a slice of cake or a fizzy drink?
I would go the slice of cake any day, but also I would say if it's a treat, let your son decide what he wants, because that's why we have treats. They should be something enjoyable and special. But if they were both an option, I'd go the cake.
Fantastic, thank you.
Thanks so much, Zoe. I just had a couple of questions about sugar, because you obviously this is something we need to try to avoid in terms of weight loss, and also it's sort of empty calories, isn't it? It's not really bringing any nutritional benefit. I suppose if you have a teaspoon of sugar and a handful of almonds, they might have the same calorie content, but they have different nutritional value, so you should avoid the sugar. But I'm just shocked by how much sugar is in the food we buy. Like, I bought my kids some bread the other day and it had sugar in it, the wraps. I mean, do you think it's realistic? I mean, do you think should we be aiming for no sugar at all? And if we are, how realistic is that? Or do you think it's just better to avoid obvious sugary food?
Yeah, I'd say definitely the latter. It's incredibly, sugar actually comes in great forms as well. So lactose is a sugar in milk. Fruit is a form of sugar as well. So it's impossible to have a nutritionally adequate diet and avoid all sugars. I think the best way to focus is looking at the really obvious sugars, and I'm thinking about table sugar use. So soft drinks is probably the easiest one to start to carve away. Having kind of reducing amounts of cakes and things like that use sugar in forms, lollies. Focus on those because sugar will be in other foods. It's tricky in terms of food labelling as well. I'm not sure, sorry, in terms of regulations in the UK, but in Australia, our food labels are carbohydrates and then total sugars. And that total sugar is sometimes the natural sugars in the product. So it's very hard to actually make an assessment in terms of the amount of sugar in a product based on the label. But when you, I guess another trick when you're reading is if you look at an ingredient list, they should be ordered in terms of the most prominent ingredient to the least prominent ingredient. So if you pick up something and sugar is the first ingredient, then that's a really kind of a useful tip to say, or maybe I'll look at another product.
Okay, and I just wanted to ask you as well, Zoe, thank you for that, about gluten, because I often get asked about this by families, especially when you read things like, going back to that issue of sports nutrition. And there's that famous tennis player, Djokovic, who's now on a gluten-free vegan diet and seems to be doing very well with it. I mean, what about this issue of gluten? Is it something we need to be aware of, or should it be on a sort of case-by-case basis if our sons are complaining of gastrointestinal issues?
I think it's a case-by-case basis if there is gastro issues. I think I had a really interesting discussion. I think we still need to remember to screen for gastro issues in boys with Duchenne, and it's not always the Duchenne causing the gastro issues. So we need to be aware and look out for celiac disease, which is when you can't eat gluten. But if you're not having issues, there should be no problem with eating gluten at all.
Great. Okay, well, I think we've been through the questions, Zoe. So
Great.
I really just wanted to thank you so incredibly much for giving us your time and for putting together your presentation. And just to say, we hope you stay safe in these very, very strange times.
Yes, and thank you again for having me. It's great to kind of have this international discussion tonight. I've just actually flicked up a contact email for myself. It's tricky. I can't really give individual advice all the way from Australia, but I am a resource for yourself, or if you're working with a dietitian who's learning about Duchenne, please feel free to hand over my email as well. But please stay safe and well, and thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Zoe. We really appreciate it. And you stay safe and well as well. Thank you on behalf of all of us at Duchenne UK. So, of course, it is important what you eat, and it's also important to monitor what you do, which is why we focused last week's webinar on exercise. And in that, we talked about the 2.6 challenge. And Alex and I were just completely overwhelmed by the response that we got. So many of you spent the weekend coming up with a huge array of 2.6 challenges and helped raise so much money for Duchenne UK. So we just wanted to take this moment to say thank you all so much for doing that. And we hope that you managed to get some enjoyment and your boys got a good bit of exercise from doing it. So just to finish off, we just wanted to reshare some websites for you in case you haven't seen them. There's the emergency information on the Duchenne emergency website. Keep up to date with all of the care guidelines on the family guide, and obviously the government websites and NHS website on advice on coronavirus. The My Cortisol app, if you haven't got that, try and download it and listen to our webinar on what to do in an emergency with steroids. And the World Duchenne Organisation are also hosting their own websites weekly. We'll be hosting another webinar next Wednesday, so please make sure you register for that. And let us know if there's any other subjects you want us to cover. If you need anything, please do get in touch at support@duchenneuk.org. We hope you are all staying safe and well during these times. Thank you so much for listening. Please do stay safe and stick to the government advice. This is a moment of national emergency. stay at home, protect our amazing NHS and save lives. Thank you all so much for listening, everybody, and goodbye.